You know, when we picture the end of a democracy, there's a very specific movie that sort of plays in our heads, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's dramatic. It's like generals in uniform, tanks rolling down the street.
Television stations suddenly going dark.
Exactly. A violent overnight takeover. It's sudden and, it's obvious.
Right. I mean, the classic military coup. It's loud, it's undeniable. And for a long time, that was really the primary mental model we had for how democracies break down.
But the reality of how these systems fail today is, it's completely different. And honestly, it's much more unsettling.
It really is.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are answering a massive, highly requested question from you, the listener. We're looking at how modern democracies actually break down and, is it possible to reverse that process?
Yeah, we're going to explore the actual mechanics of democratic erosion.
Right. And then we'll look at Iran as a contemporary case study of what happens when these structural cracks are tested under extreme pressure.
To get to the bottom of this, we're drawing on a really robust stack of sources. We're anchoring our discussion in comprehensive data from the Varieties of Democracy Institute, or VDEM.
And for some context, for everyone, VDEM isn't just like a single think tank, right?
No. It's a massive global network. We're talking thousands of scholars who track hundreds of indicators. So everything from press freedom to judicial independence.
Wow.
Yeah, it's largely considered the gold standard for measuring the health of global political systems. And we are looking at their latest data alongside some recent political science papers on post-populism and analyses of the modern authoritarian playbook.
And right out of the gate, we really need to establish the core reality of that data. Today, democracies are far more likely to be dismantled completely legally.
Right, by the very leaders that the people elected.
Exactly. Now, the sources we're looking at discuss a wide range of modern political figures in countries across the global spectrum. So places like Venezuela and Hungary, the U.S. and Turkey, Brazil and Poland.
A really broad spectrum.
Right. And I just want to say clearly, we are going to impartially report the academic and data-driven perspectives provided in these sources.
Yeah. We aren't here to endorse any political viewpoint or take sides.
Not at all. We're strictly trying to convey the structural concepts and the mechanics detailed in the research.
Exactly. The focus is entirely on the underlying machinery of how political systems change, regardless of the specific ideology that's driving that change.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because to understand that machinery, we first have to, discard the myth of the one-way street, don't we?
We do. For a long time, there was this assumption, especially after what political scientist Samuel Huntington called the third wave of democratization in the late 20th century.
Right, the 80s and 90s.
Exactly. There was this feeling that once a country reached a certain level of democratic maturity, it was just permanent. The global consensus was basically that democracy was the final destination of human government.
But the data you're looking at completely shatters that finish line assumption.
Oh, it really does. What followed that huge wave of democratization was a severe democratic recession. And the research shows a really alarming fatality rate.
How bad is it?
Historically, once a democracy enters a period of backsliding, meaning a sustained decline in those democratic indicators we just mentioned, it has an 80 to 84% chance of ending in a total democratic breakdown.
Over 80%? Wait, really?
Yeah.
So if you start slipping, the statistical probability is that you are going to crash.
Pretty much. And the reason it's so fatal is tied directly to how the method has changed. We've moved away from those sudden military coups to what the literature calls executive aggrandizement and autocratic legalism.
Autocratic legalism, what does that actually look like?
Well, modern leaders maintain the facade of democracy. They keep the elections, they keep the Constitution, but they hollow the system out from the inside. They use what are known as salami tactics.
Salami tactics.
Yeah, they slice away at the core of the democracy piece by piece.
Right.
But they cut so thinly that no single slice ever really feels like a fatal blow.
Okay, so the old way of losing democracy was like a violent home invasion. You knew it was happening, and you could try to fight back.
Right.
But this new way is more like a termite infestation. Everything looks perfectly fine from the outside. The paint is fresh. The roof looks solid until you lean against a wall and the whole house just collapses into dust.
That is a perfect analogy. And those termites are using the legal system to do the chewing.
So they're passing laws to break the system.
Exactly. These modern leaders, they're often running what we call informational autocracies. They rely far less on mass repression and far more on exploiting legal loopholes.
Okay, can you give me an example of that?
Sure. So they rarely just fire independent judges, right? That would cause a massive uproar.
Right, that's too obvious.
Yeah. Instead, they might pass a seemingly mundane law lowering the mandatory retirement age for the judiciary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And suddenly, half the Supreme Court is legally forced to step down, and then the executive gets to fill all those empty seats with absolute loyalists.
That's wild. And it's entirely legal.
Completely legal. It's framed as bureaucratic reform, which makes it incredible.
Are you saying people are willingly burning down their own house just to get rid of a spider in the living room?
Basically, yes. When extreme polarization takes root, voters begin to view the opposing political party not just as, people they disagree with on tax policy or healthcare.
Yeah, as an enemy.
Right, as an existential threat to their identity or their physical safety. And when that happens, this partisan trade-off kicks in.
Okay.
Voters become willing to tolerate authoritarian behavior, like rewriting election laws or silencing journalists from their own leader, because the alternative of the enemy winning feels far more dangerous.
So populism basically becomes a weapon.
Exactly. Now, populism itself isn't inherently anti-democratic. I mean, it often starts as a necessary mechanism to give voice to marginalized groups.
Sure, giving power to the people.
Right. But when a leader begins to claim that they and only they represent the true people, they use that mandate to delegitimize any opposition.
Ah, I see.
The opposition aren't just rivals anymore, They are framed as traitors. And while the public is distracted by this intense polarization, the leader engages in what's called elite cohort replacement.
Now, I noticed the sources mention structures like Putin's Siloviki in Russia when talking about this replacement. What exactly does that look like in practice?
Well, Siloviki translates roughly to people of force.
People of force. Got it.
Yeah. It refers to the strategy of an executive slowly swapping out independent experts, career civil servants, and impartial military generals. And they replace them with former intelligence officers and security personnel who are personally loyal to the leader.
So they're gutting the institutions.
Completely. They fill the bureaucratic machinery with people whose entire livelihood depends on the regime.
Wow.
By the time the public realizes the institutional checks and balances are gone, the people in charge of the system are the very ones who dismantled it.
Okay, theory and historical data are one thing, but if you really want to see exactly how these cracks form under maximum pressure today, we have to look at a real-world focal point.
Right.
And that brings us to Iran.
Yeah. Iran is a highly illustrative case study. It's a system that has actually moved past backsliding into full consolidation.
What do the numbers say about it?
The recent VDEM data classifies Iran's trajectory as a move into a closed autocracy. The researchers track severe, systematic restrictions on civic space and a deeply concerning loss of freedom from political killings.
And the catalyst for this recent escalation is well documented in the research, right?
Yes. It was the September 2022 death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini while in the custody of Iran's morality police.
The research details how that event sparked massive nationwide protests, and the state met them with brutal crackdowns.
Really brutal.
The sources explicitly analyze what became known as Bloody Friday in September 2022, where security forces used unlawful, lethal force, resulting in the deaths of dozens of protesters and bystanders in a single day.
Yeah, it was a major escalation.
Now, you would think that this level of overwhelming, violent repression is designed to silence people, and historically it usually works, right?
Yeah, usually, yes.
But the VDEM data reveals a massive paradox here.
It really does. The data shows that despite the intense repression of civil society organizations, there was a massive spike in mobilization for democracy among the Iranian people.
A spike? Wait, so the crackdown actually backfired?
Exactly. And crucially, this mobilization was incredibly broad. It bridged traditional societal divides, spanning different ethnicities, age groups, genders, and social classes.
That's incredible.
Yeah, the intense repression actually induced higher political polarization against the regime rather than subduing the populace.
This highlights something really nuanced about the Iranian system and the sources. We tend to view authoritarian regimes as these, static, impenetrable monoliths, right?
Or one guy pushes a button and everything happens.
Exactly. But the research points to a concept called controlled competition.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Even in non-democracies, different political factions compete for influence and resources. The research specifically looks at how factions within Iran's hybrid system debate international issues.
Right, like the Paris Climate Accords.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I have to stop you there. Why on earth would an autocratic regime care about debating the Paris Climate Accords while they are literally simultaneously suppressing their own citizens?
I know, it sounds crazy, but it serves as a highly effective safety valve.
A safety valve?
Yeah. You can have a fierce public political debate about carbon emissions or international environmental policy without ever questioning the authority of the supreme leader or the core structure of the regime.
Oh, wow. So it's like a distraction.
Sort of.
Yeah.
It allows different factions within the government to mobilize their specific bases of supporters, justify their ideological positions, and create an illusion of political participation and debate. It safely vents political steam.
But clearly, based on the protests, that safety valve isn't enough to relieve the pressure of a population demanding fundamental rights.
No, not at all. Which is why the research outlines that Iran faces critical structural vulnerabilities typical of transitional societies.
What kind of vulnerabilities?
Well, they're dealing with severe economic instability, a lack of formal independent party systems, and a massive institutional concentration of power.
Right.
Violent repression can strengthen an autocratic regime's grip in the short term, but it also creates sharp, irreconcilable divisions in the bedrock of the society.
It weakens the foundation over time.
Exactly. The broad mobilization we are seeing across different demographics is essentially the Iranian people testing those foundational cracks.
The sheer resilience required to keep pushing against that kind of systemic violence is, well, it's just astounding to read about.
It really is.
And it proves a vital point that transitions us into the final piece of this puzzle. People do not easily surrender their rights.
No, they don't.
So when a democracy breaks down or when a country falls into closed autocracy, is that the end of the story? Because the data offers a genuinely surprising answer here.
It really does. It introduces the concept of the U-turn, or bounce-back resilience.
I love this part.
Yeah. According to the VDEM data from 1900 to 2023, 46% of all autocratization episodes that started in democracies were eventually reversed.
46%.
Yep. And if we narrow our focus to just the last 30 years, that number actually climbs to 54%.
More than half.
Yeah.
In the modern era, if a democracy starts backsliding, the majority of the time, it actually bounces back.
Yeah. Autocratization is common, but successfully consolidating that authoritarian rule permanently is becoming statistically harder.
Okay, but these U-turns do not happen by accident, right?
Definitely not. The research identifies 3 vital, non-negotiable ingredients required for a society to pull out of a backslide.
What are they?
First, you need an independent judiciary. You need courts that are willing to stand up and provide veto points to legally block executive power grabs.
Okay, makes sense. What's the second?
Second, you need autonomous electoral management bodies. If the people running the elections are compromised, well, you cannot vote the aspiring autocrat out.
Right, they'll just rig it.
Exactly. And third, you need a unified opposition that coalesces with civil society and mass mobilization.
Okay, but wait. That completely contradicts the partisan trade-off we just covered.
How so?
Well, if voters are so polarized that they view the other side as an existential threat, how do rival political groups suddenly hold hands and form a unified opposition? I mean, that seems impossible.
It is incredibly difficult, which is exactly why U-turns fail nearly half the time. For a U-turn to succeed, the opposition factions have to experience a collective realization. They have to recognize that the survival of the democratic system itself is fundamentally more important than their individual policy differences.
Have we actually seen that happen?
Oh, yeah. We've seen this happen in the data in places like Zambia, Brazil, and Poland.
How do they actually pull it off in those places?
Basically by swallowing their political pride. You might have a socialist party and a free market conservative party who absolutely despise each other's platforms.
Right.
But they realize they can't debate tax policy if the parliament ceases to exist. So they form a broad electoral coalition.
Just to beat the one guy.
Exactly. They back a single joint candidate simply to outmaneuver the autocrat's salami tactics at the ballot box. They put the structural fire out before they go back to arguing about the furniture.
Okay, but there is a very strict time limit on this, right? The sources mentioned a ticking clock for these U-turns.
Yes, the timing is critical. Pro-democracy actors basically have a 4 to 6 year window to reverse the trend, which usually aligns with a single electoral cycle.
And what happens if they miss that window?
The data warns that if an autocratizing episode persists for more than 10 years, making a U-turn becomes statistically almost impossible.
Why is the 10-year mark the point of no return? What mechanically happens at that decade point?
It comes down to bureaucratic and demographic reality. After 10 years, an autocrat has usually survived 2 full election cycles.
Okay.
That gives them enough time to complete the elite cohort replacement we talked about earlier, the independent career civil servants, the old guard generals, and the impartial judges hit retirement age, or they get exhausted and quit.
Oh, I see.
And the newly minted graduates entering the government have only ever known the autocrat system. The institutions are fully hollowed out and restaffed with loyalists. At that point, the system is consolidated. You have to act early.
Wow. Okay, so to bring this all together for you, the listener, we've journeyed through the mechanics of how modern democracies actually erode.
Yeah, we looked at the slow, quiet decay of salami tactics, where leaders use the law to dismantle the law.
We explored the psychological trap of the partisan trade-off, where our own polarization makes us excuse authoritarianism in our own ranks.
Right, and we saw the harrowing reality of the Iranian people pushing back against a closed system, exposing the cracks in that foundation.
And finally, we looked at the proven mechanics of the U-turn. The blueprint for both the breakdown and the recovery is sitting right there in the historical data.
It really is.
And this is why staying engaged matters for you, regardless of what country you live in. Protecting the independence of your local courts, supporting free media, and defending the autonomy of your election boards isn't just dry political trivia.
No, absolutely not.
Those institutions are the immune system of your society. If you're compromised, the whole body is at risk.
We've seen throughout this deep dive that the modern authoritarian playbook relies on us treating incremental rule breaking as just normal politics.
Yeah.
So I'd leave you with this final thought to mull over. When you see a leader, specifically a leader you happen to agree with politically, bypassing the usual checks and balances to quickly push an agenda through, are you witnessing efficient leadership, or are you watching the very first slice of the salami being cut?
That is a powerful question. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep paying attention, keep asking the hard questions, and we'll see you next time.